I've played around with a couple different ways to create my own FSR, which is short for force sensitive resistor. I probably also spent way more money on making my own than just buying a pre-made solution. However, what's the fun in that? I will be making a bigger version of this little guy. I won't be able to make this as thin or as small as this, but it should work for what I need it to do. This was my proof of concept to see if this would even work. I used some aluminum foil, spray glue, and paper to make the electrical contacts, and a piece of carbon filter for the resistive part of the button. This degraded quickly since nothing was contained, but when I did some more tests using heat shrink tubing, everything seemed to work out much better. And this is similar to the final version, which I'll talk about later. The materials that I used are as follows: a carbon air filter, jeweler copper tape, heating vent aluminum tape, some heat shrink tubing. I recommend getting a spool if you want to make longer sensors. And then some thin cardboard. I just used a soda box. As a bit of a side note, I would match the length of the heat shrink tubing to the length of the FSR that you're trying to make. Butting the heat shrink tubing like this made for some very inconsistent buttons. Now let's go through how I built mine. I'm going to be making all four of my sensors all at once. So there's going to be quite a bit of cutting. First, I cut out 8 pieces of cardboard, 4 of which are 145 millimeters by 15 millimeters. The next 4 are 155 millimeters by 15 millimeters. The next part on the chopping block is the copper tape. I had to cut 8 of these at 155 millimeters long. Now, aluminum tape, 4 pieces, 145 millimeters long by 15 millimeters wide. Carbon filter. If you're following along, you may need to experiment with whatever carbon filter you buy. I found out cutting strips to make double layers seemed to work the best for my use case. But depending on how thick, you may need to not double it up, make it 3 layers, 4 layers to make it work properly. I just did a 15 millimeter wide strip so I can double it up. And then finally, heat shrink tubing. You'll need 4 of these at 145 millimeters long if you're following along. Now for the fun part, assembly. I take the copper tape and I put them on the 155 millimeter long cardboard pieces. I place them as parallel as I can and keep a very thin gap between them, like this. Next, I take the aluminum tape and the 145 millimeter long piece of cardboard and I put it on the cardboard like this, as square as possible. And then the somewhat complicated bit, stuffing everything into the tube. I take the doubled over carbon filter and take the longer piece. I place it like this, keeping copper tabs on one side. And I place the folded side near the copper tabs. Then I take the aluminum piece, place it on top like this, lining the other end up here. After that, I'll struggle and put this into the tube, trying to keep everything lined up as it goes in. Once you put everything in here, you heat shrink everything down, and you'll end up with a piece like this once you cut off the excess carbon filter. Now hopefully I have a working FSR for my gamepad. If you find this useful, put a comment down and a like the video. Otherwise, have a nice day.